Hello and welcome to the Student Hub Live. My name's Karen Foley and I will be your host for the next few hours. We've got a really great programme and it's lovely to see so many familiar faces in the chat, but you might not have been to one of these events before, so let me explain how it all works. This is an online interactive event and we're live today, but you may be watching this on catch-up, and if indeed you need to nip out later, there will be a catch-up service available shortly afterwards as well. Now, the way that this works best is for you to watch and engage, which means logging in through the watch and engage option on the website, studenthub.kmi.open.ac.uk. When you do that, you put in your student or your staff ID and your password, and then that will connect you to Stadium. The other option is to watch only, and if indeed you're having technical problems or you don't have an Open University Computer username, you can do that too, and then you'll see the live stream of the video. When you're in the Watch and Engage, you can chat along to everyone else, and things we really like to know are what module you're studying, what level you're studying, and how you're feeling about things. You might have an EMA or an exam due. You might be feeling a bit anxious about that. You might be feeling very cold today, depending on where you are. So let us know how you're feeling, what you're doing, and where you're at. Now, you can do that in the chat, but you can also click on the widgets, which are our interactive tools. So there's a map, there's a Wordle. Now, these Wordles, we'll be using a few of them today, and if you haven't used one before, there are 3 options. You need to put something in each box, otherwise it won't submit. So if you can only think of 1 or 2 things, just put a full stop or a cross, and then it will submit your options as well for that. So let us know which module you're studying, which sort of general area you're studying, and how you're feeling, and that would be fantastic. But as I said, it's lovely to see so many familiar people in the chat. The Student Hub Live has been going for a couple of years now, and we run events to support students in their studies. And we've selected a great lineup of guests to talk to you today. But what's most important is your opinion and your advice, because you're OU students and you'll have picked up some brilliant tips along the way. So please do share those with each other. That is what makes this event so very special. And the people who are going to be feeding in all of your comments and advice are Sophie and HJ on our hot desk. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
Hi.
How are you both today? And do you have an exam or an end of module assessment due?
I have, yes, end of module assessment, I think is more like for me, finishing up some assignments. So hopefully some good tips for today. And we've got our board behind us ready to write down all our favourite tips and advice. So yes, we always like that.
Yes, please send them through. You can either tweet them to us at Student Hub Live, or you can send them to studenthub@open.ac.uk and we will get those up on our board.
And it seems in the chat we're all about delinquency and riots from these DD 102 students. So I don't know what they're about there, but we may have to watch them. There's a few art students there. Science students, as always, have a good, strong showing. We've got people, Desmond's watching from Berlin and Jordan's watching from sunny Spain, I'm told. So, yes, welcome and yes, hello, we're excited. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad everyone's been talking about delinquency and riots, because you'll be delighted with who we've got first in our session. We've got Chair of DD 102, Matt Staples. Welcome, Matt. Yeah. And Georgina Blakeley, who was the Chair of DD 102. And you both know a lot about delinquency and riots, and students on the J presentation doing TMA 05. But some students might be midway through. They might have started in February as well, because this module has 2 intakes, doesn't it? Okay. So, Matt, you've been analysing all the stats of students. How might the students at level 1 on DD 102, if they're a J or a B starter, so October or February, what might they be doing right now?
Well, if they will have just submitted TM05, that was due on the 20th actually, but there'll be some extensions. We've had a few extensions granted, just because students are busy, caring, careers. So they will have hopefully just submitted or just be doing that particular TMA. A lot of psychologists on DD 102, and so they've chosen obviously the delinquency question, explanations as to why people, commit crime, which is good. And then on J the B presentation, that's a very good question. I don't actually chair J or B. That's actually Vicky Johnson, because we've split it now. So I've got a colleague, and I'm trying to think, where would they be on B?
They'll be between TMA 03 and 04, I think.
Yeah.
But that's searching my memory, but I think that's about where they'll be.
So quite a focused moment. And I have to say, which is a lovely thing to say, students on the J presentation, they're doing pretty well actually. Yeah, it's all looking very good in terms of a high completion rate and high pass rate.
They are, aren't they? Because so often, I mean, we've got 72% of students here at level 1 and 65% are with FAST. So a lot will be in your cohort. But if you're not from level 1 or from FAST, don't worry, because this will apply broadly whether you're doing an EMA or an exam. There's lots and lots of stuff in here for everybody. But often students don't sort of think, actually, I'm picking up all these skills. I'm near the end of a module. They're doing incredibly well. Yeah. And yet, you know, often they're sitting there thinking, I've got this end of module assessment. I don't know what it is because they haven't done one before. So there can be quite a lot of anxiety. So today we're going to be talking about your OU journey and various things throughout that are going to sort of help you, hopefully, to check in with how well you're doing and what skills you've been picking up along the way. But for students with EMAs, especially the ones on the J presentation, I think, who are mostly in our audience today, why might they be anxious about this end of module assessment?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, just the title in itself, end of module assignment, it differentiates itself from the TMAs. It won't be marked by their tutor as well, which might be a cause of concern or anxiety for some students as well. And often it's weighted slightly more highly than some of the other TMAs, and so it's actually quite important. And they also really have to pass it, you know, to go through, although obviously there's a resubmission opportunity as well. And so what generally happens at level 1 is you have an OCAS, which is the continuous assessment, the TMAs they've done, and then the examinable component, which is the EMA, and you have to really pass both of those in order to progress through. But as I say, there's always the resubmission if they don't quite make it. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I've got a massive list of questions that we've got to cover. But let's first see how everybody's feeling right now, because we asked you on our words cloud, and you can fill this in at any point as well if you haven't done so already. How are you feeling? So let's see what is happening with everyone at home. We've got some lovely words here. Happy, excited, anxious, want to move on, charming, ready, depressed, mildly aromatic. I wonder if someone's cooking. Probably, if you've been to the Student Hub Live before. Now, a lot of you have been to the Student Hub Live before. Just under half have been to one of our events before. But that also means that half of you haven't. And you may think, oh, everyone's knowing everybody else in the chat, because we've got some wonderful, helpful and very, very friendly students out there who regularly come to these. So do let us know. Do put something in the chat, even if you want to tell us where you are or if you've got a question. We promise we will do our utmost best to answer any questions that you put in the chat. So do come in and say hello, and everyone's really, really friendly and nice. And HJ and Sophie can help you if you've got any questions. They will do the best that they can to help you engage in the programme today. Right, so why do modules have an end of module assessment? I mean, why don't we just do this TMA thing that feels quite nice and comfortable and that people get all of this assessment from? Why have something like this?
Well, I think probably students think it's some kind of punishment, but it's not. And I think the best way to see it is as a chance to shine. So rather than kind of feeling nervous and anxious, what students should be feeling right now is, goodness me, how well I've done. You know, I've got this far. I've got nearly 5 TMAs under my belt, which is a huge achievement for students. And they should then try and look at the EMA as the chance to show what it is that they've learned. And it's good in that sense to kind of use it as a bit of self-reflection, look back at all the skills that they've developed, look back at the knowledge and understanding they've gained and think, yeah, I'm really going to show the tutor what I've done on this module. So it's a different way of thinking about it, I guess. It's a kind of glass half full, glass half empty. So sort of turn it on its head and see it as a massive achievement.
Now, you raised an interesting point here, because you're talking about throughout the module. And I think that for I mean, every module will be different. And I've got some here later that I'm going to test you on to see if you can identify some of the words that some of our students will be grappling with right now. But often they are more holistic. They're about integrating various themes that have gone on. Now, whilst you say that students have maybe been looking at various blocks throughout, all of a sudden this integration is perhaps quite different. We're looking at themes and strands and all sorts of things that we're expecting students to weave together. So what's that all about? And can they then just go and find bits that they've done well in their TMAs and put them together?
Well, the answer to the last point is definitely no. But no, because we would find that out. No. I mean, it's a real skill being to integrate, and the other word I love, and I can sometimes struggle to say with a lisp, is synthesis, basically bringing together different materials and different ideas. And it shows to the marker that the student's got a very good understanding of how the module fits together. And they're happy to link different parts of the course in a coherent way. And actually that they've understood what the course is trying to teach, actually. And so the EMA is really the opportunity for the student to show that, I think, in a very clear way, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all modules are kind of structured differently. So some modules will have kind of 3 or 4 key questions that go all the way through the module. Other modules will have a set of kind of key themes or perhaps key concepts. And it's about students kind of using those and, as Matt says, seeing the connections between them. So you can show to a tutor that you've not just understood one chapter, but you've actually got a sense of the themes and the links and the questions that have kind of gone throughout the module.
So pretty much students could, if they're doing something quite holistic over the whole module, they could pretty much take bits and everything might be different. You're probably going to mark 100 EMAs and you could have ones that were amazing because they've gone off on this strand. Someone will have gone off on this strand. There's no right or wrong really, like, you know, TMAs will have more of a clear focus. But when you've got the opportunity to integrate various themes, you do have that creativity to do things. Now, how does that work? What do you see when you say this is really good? What's a good EMA, bearing in mind there could be a range of things that people might pick up on?
Well, I guess first and foremost, a good EMA is one that answers the question. And so I think the first piece of advice for students is to look at the question and look at the question again and then look at the question again, because you really need to understand what it is the question is asking you. It's not about just writing everything you know. It's not about writing the essay that you'd like to write. It's about using the material to answer the question that's set, whether you like the question or not. And that's really important to do that.
And just understand the background to the question. I mean, talking about the way EMAs are structured, I mean, for example, on DD 102, you've got a choice out of two out of 3 strands. But on DD 103, for example, the focus is on the latter part of the course. So it's blocks 3 and 4. And so you've really got to, understand the question and then understand, you know, what areas of content you're being asked to focus on as well. So be really, really clear about that before you do anything else, yeah.
And I guess be careful not to do too much. You can't throw everything in there. So to use DD 102 again as the example, you're not being asked to look at material from all 3 strands. It's 2 out of the 3. So you are kind of being asked to give an overview, but don't put everything in there because you can't do that. It's only a short essay, really. 1,500 words tends to be the kind of word limit for EMAs. So you can't do everything.
No. And I guess it's about choosing the right level of description and evaluation, not trying to cram everything in, but actually really selecting your evidence and trying to use it appropriately and applying it to the question instead of perhaps being a bit more detailed like you may have been earlier on when you were perhaps describing something in an essay where you could have a lot of content to go through a particular example.
Yeah, and again, I think, you know, we kind of focus on the question, but equally as important, if not more so in some ways, are the student notes that go with the question. You know, don't make the mistake of just looking at the question and think, oh, I know what that's asking, and go off and do it. Look through the student notes because they're there for a reason and they're there to give you a guide, lots of clues about what to look at, how to approach things and how to do things. So they really are useful. So, you know, sometimes they're a bit long, but there's some really good advice in there. So please do use them.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot of students from FAST. They're increasing and rising. So the Matt and Georgina fan club is here and present. Let me take a quick trip to the hot desk because you've been filling in the Wordle and there have been various words and we'll show that a little bit later. But there is, you know, a lot of anxiety around the end of module assessment and I'd like to find out a bit more about what that's like for you. Sophie and HJ, what are people talking about in the chat?
It's very busy actually in the chat, so I just wanted to remind people, especially those who haven't been before, if you're struggling to keep up, there's just a little pin button at the top right hand corner. If you click on that, that will mean that you can control the speed of the chat then. So if you are missing things, click on that little pin button, you can scroll up and down. So we've got quite a few questions. Ross is asking if the marking on an EMA is harsher than the normal marking for TMAs.
Matt.
It's a very good question. I mean, what we try to do for quality assurance, we get together with all the markers, basically over a weekend, and we send them some sample scripts, basically, and then we do something called standardisation. So we all mark it, and then we come together and we try to get a kind of a consensus opinion on what we think that TMA is worth. So all the markers are going to go into the marking, hopefully with a similar view of what kind of TMA, what they're looking for in the EMAs. And generally speaking, there's not a massive difference between the mean for TMAs and the mean for the EMA. I mean, the big difference is it won't be your tutor who's marking it. But generally speaking, they're not that, no, it's not much harsher actually. You would have thought sometimes there will maybe be a bit of subjectivity because your tutor knows you, and obviously the other tutor who's going to be marking your work won't know you, but there's not a massive difference, no. So the answer's no. It'll be fair, appropriate marking, yeah.
And they're double marked as well, and there's all sorts of checks in place to make sure that someone's not just having a bad day.
Exactly.
Although one thing I would say, having marked some of these, is that often you are marking them in a very short space of time with a lot to compare. And when I've marked them, I found that clarity from students is really important. When you've got a really nice intro and you think, yes, the student knows what they're talking about, those things can really help.
Yeah, no, structure, I mean, it is really important. We'll talk what makes a good EMA later, but a very clear structure with obviously, we've got lots of online activities, talking about the introduction, main body and conclusion. But just to say, I mean, Georgina and I have spent many hours looking at any scripts which are on the borderline of kind of pass-fail. The module team looks at all these. And so I can't really reiterate enough just how stringent the exams process is, to make sure that all students are treated fairly. And as I say, if a tutor's unsure about a mark, it would be referred to us and we would look at it as an award board, just to make sure everybody's treated fairly.
Yeah, but we want students to pass. We're not looking to catch them up, trip them over. We really want students to pass, and that's how we kind of approach each script. But also important, as Matt says, is to make it easy for the person who's reading it. So, tell them what you're going to do in the essay, then do it, and then say how you've done it. That's the kind of key. You want to read something that's, where it's going.
Sean says he's really excited about doing the EMA because he has the freedom to write about what he wants to write about now, which, as we were saying earlier, is the wonderful thing because you can be selective about the material. So shall we start talking about how one might approach this then? So how you actually get your notes and the questions that you've got, and how you actually start to approach the EMA. Because I guess our students by now will hopefully have gotten to the idea about timetabling, and we won't go into that sort of detail now. But assuming that they're going to approach this as a written piece of work over the period of a few weeks and things, what might they start doing first in terms of the question, going through the notes, etc.?
I guess the practical thing is to, once they've kind of had a look at the question and importantly the deadline, is to then go and look at their diary and work out when they're going to do it. So work out what are the family commitments they've got, work commitments, days off, things like that, and think, well, okay, how am I going to fit this process in? Because it's not just a case of thinking, let's leave it till the last minute and I'll dash something off. You really do need to think about it and plan it, perhaps even more so than you do an essay, because you are going to have to look at material from across the module. Not all of it, but at least kind of one or two blocks perhaps. And so you need the time to do that, to find the material that you want to use to answer the question. So you can't really just do it on a Sunday afternoon. It's going to take more time than that, and at least a couple of sessions to do that, which is why the kind of planning of your time, planning your diary is really important, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. He said not to, I think revision, having a clear sense of what they're going to do over the next 4 weeks, actually. But just kind of going back to the freedom thing, that is nice because they've got 4 weeks to think about the question and to prepare for it. And actually, students have got their qualification. And actually, there's a bit of an opportunity now, because DD 102 in particular has kind of input from a lot of different kind of disciplines, psychology, politics, or whatever. You can slant the question because some of the strands are slightly more slanted towards particular disciplines and kind of areas of interest. And so that is quite nice. So, I'm glad they're excited because that is nice. You have got an element of choice there.
Now, what's your advice? We were having a disagreement at a tutorial on Saturday, and students had two options, and some of them were going for something they felt really strongly about, about. And they came back and they said, I wish I hadn't done that because actually I couldn't really look at it objectively because I felt so strongly about it. And other students saying this is a bit boring. Where would you recommend students go in terms of their interest? Or like if they've got this whole thing and they can say choose 2 out of 3 strands, or they can be a bit selective, would you encourage them to go with something that they've really enjoyed, something they disagree with? How would you sort of recommend they start drawing out initially some of the material they might consider using?
I mean, interest is tempting, and you tend to do better if you're interested in something. But perhaps even more important than that is use the material that's going to help you best answer the question. So it's not always about the example, for example, that most interests you, but it's about the example that best illustrates the claim, the argument that you want to make, which is not always the one that interests you the most. So it is hard and it is a dilemma, actually. And there's no kind of easy answer to that. But it really is about selecting the material, the examples that are best going to support the argument you're going to make.
I mean, how do students do that? I mean, and Sean, you might want to tell us a little bit about, you know, what you're excited about and maybe some of the areas you're looking at doing. But how might students cope with this? They're really interested, say, in one area. It may or may not be answering the question. They may or may not be going onto the library and doing a bit of additional research. And as you say, Georgina, this is about assessing your understanding of the module material, which it has to be first and foremost, even though there is this wonderful flexibility there. What sort of parameters would you suggest students have in terms of checking back, is this answering the question? And how can I sort of get the bits that I love doing, but make sure it is on task?
Well, the student notes are the absolute guide. They will give you clear kind of direction and pointers as to what areas to look at. The other thing I think are really useful for students, and again, modules will differ slightly, but there'll be either end of block summaries, there'll be end of chapter summaries where all the key points are there. And they're really good whether you're doing an EMA, a written EMA, or whether you're doing an exam, because they'll kind of distill or synthesise, as kind of Matt says, the key points for each part of the module. So go back to those first. You know, one thing you're not going to be able to do is to start rereading things. You know, you're not going to start, I'll just read that chapter again, I'll just do that again. So you need to kind of go for the shorthand, as it were, and look at those summaries, whether it's end of module or end of chapter, because that will give you a really good starting point.
Yeah. And I mean, from kind of the last couple of weeks onwards, you know, most courses have kind of end of module day schools, revision day schools, which they will be focusing, and I know you live as well, sessions focusing on different ways to answer the question, the kinds of material you might think about using. You know, so are there a couple of strands that would, you know, support this particular question about making and remaking in unequal ways? You know, so I would, if you can, I know people are busy, basically try to find some time to go to an OU Live or to go to a day school. So I'm doing a day school for DD 103 on Saturday in London, for example, not plugging that necessarily, but, you know, so, and I've advised all my students, you know, you've not been to many tutorials, but try to get to this one. Because people are busy, but if you can, this is probably the time to do it, actually, So we get a lot of students at the start of a year coming to tutorials and day schools, and then it kind of often ebbs away a bit because people are so busy.
Do you think students ever think, I haven't been to any, the tutor's definitely going to know and they're going to be really cross with me if I turn up at this late stage?
No, it's fantastic they come, you know, because I think this is the point, it really does make a difference. Because it's a harder task, you know, it is a harder task because you're bringing together a lot more material than you would have done for other TMAs, actually, and there's a lot more possibilities. Excitement's kind of twinned with uncertainty because you've got to pick and choose, actually, and so often the reassuring support of a tutor actually talking you through the TMA can support the module materials and what the module team have done,
But also don't make the mistake of thinking it's completely different to everything I've done before. You know, there is a difference, certainly, in that you're giving that overview and there's that flexibility, which can be both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But it is almost just another TMA, you know, so what you've done well in your other TMAs, continue to do. The areas that your tutor has said, well, actually, you could do with improving that a bit, look at those areas and try and improve them for the EMA. But it's not completely different, so don't kind of get that out of proportion, I think I would say as well.
No, I would agree with that. And also, this is probably a good time to build into your revision strategy maybe looking back at your previous TMAs, looking back at what you've done well, actually, you know, so how have you handled material from different strands, actually, and you think, oh, I could use some of the ways I've approached. I'd not use the material, but actually use my understanding of the strands and build that into my revision, and also use the self-reflection. What does your tutor said in the correspondence tuition and the self-reflection feedback? What has your tutor said about how you're doing? Which areas do you need to look at? That's a good starting point, actually. Along with looking at the question, yeah, definitely.
And of course, space from a TMA can be a really valuable thing. I know most students will get their feedback and look through it at the time. But I, for example, wouldn't be unsurprised if a student said, actually, I've been going through all my notes and, you know, TMA 2 very early on, well, could you explain this? It might be a nice time to seek clarification. And often people will be a bit further away from something that they were writing with such passion at the time to maybe look at their, you know, work more objectively.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important thing to do is to look back at all the feedback you've been given on the different TMAs and write a short list. The things that I do well, because there will be those, but the things that I need to work on. So if every time you've done a TMA, your tutor says, well, you're still not quite there with the referencing, well, now's the time to get it right, you know. And if you need help with that, speak to your tutor, you know, that's what they're there for. Don't think, oh, I'm almost at the end of the module, you know, they won't kind of be wanting to help me. Well, they will. They really want you to succeed. So do get in touch with your tutor, even if you've not done so before. You know, they're not going to say, well, where have you been? They're just going to be like, great, you know, you're in touch.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Let's see what Sophie and HJ have to say, because I hear that there's some questions about tutorials.
There's a lot going on in the chat. It's really good. We've had some really nice pointers, some really nice questions. So keep them coming. Thanks ever so much. If there's anything we don't cover, drop us an email at studenthub@open.ac.uk. HJ, which questions have you got?
Well, there was a couple of questions. We were talking about the different types of tutorials we like, about having European tutorials, and we were talking about Brexit earlier, so maybe interesting implications there. But because we've got online tutorials, so like maybe what's available for European students as well. And we're having questions about balancing full arguments and sticking to word counts, and what happens if you're confused by tutor comments. I think those are perhaps our three main things at the moment that we would like to know about.
Well, let's stick with tutor comments first. Let me make a note of these and we'll go through it. So let's go back to tutor comments first. If you're confused about your tutor's comments.
It makes me smile, because my sister did an OU degree and she sometimes got comments back from the tutor like, improve your structure. And she used to ring me up and say, well, what do they mean, improve my structure? If you've got a comment and you're not sure what it means, ask your tutor. And if possible, ask them to give you an example. They can't always, because, you know, they're writing a lot of feedback for different students. But if they haven't provided you with an example of what they mean, then please, you know, ask them again and say, well, when you say improve my structure, what do you mean? How do I do that? Show me an example of how you do that. Because it's very hard sometimes to think, well, you know, if someone says, you know, your introduction could be better or your conclusion could be better, in what ways, you know, how do I do that? Is there an example of a good conclusion and a good introduction that you could show me? Because I think that's really important. So, you know, do go back and ask that, because it's absolutely the right thing to do.
I would definitely agree with that. And, you know, it can be by telephone or it can be my email. Often the very good thing to do is have some structured questions that you send to your tutor either before the conversation you're going to have by telephone, or if it's an email conversation, you know, just the clear, structured questions you've got for them, actually, so they really know what you need to know. Yeah.
And actually, sometimes it's a really good idea to have a conversation, because even if you've said this, this and this, it may be that you can both open a TMA and your tutor can help find things that you've done where you have evaluated things, as a, you know, so you can help point out and look at the things, because there's only a limit to how much, you know, feedback a tutor can give you. They're not going to write more than you. That's not the name of the game. But equally, there might be things you can pick up on if you really want to know.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I think the improvement by example as well. You know, if a tutor can provide an example of how to, you know, link a paragraph or, you know, whatever the student is struggling with, I think that's helpful as well. You know, but there are good online activities as well, you know, just a plug for those that actually go through these things, you know, about how to structure a piece of work. On DD 102, we've got one for kind of relatively straightforward essays and then for slightly more complex essays. And so I would really ask students to have a look at that and then maybe go through that. And then if they're still not sure, maybe ring the tutor, you know, and have that conversation. The big thing at this point is really to use all the avenues of help you can. basically. So take advantage of the day schools and tutorials, take advantage of the online activities, and really use today as a springboard. Say from today, I'm going to get on it.
Well, there you go, Paul and Clara. You can now start looking at some of those resources online. But we also have a whole hour on essay planning, where Nikki Harlow and I will be making some hamburgers to show you how to plan and write an essay and how to make it delicious. So we'll be doing that later. But don't forget, there are these online activities. And also, it is common to have problems with essay planning. Some people still think, don't really have time to do the essay planning. How important is the planning in this whole process?
I think really important. One of the tips that I was also going to mention on DD 102 is we have end of strand summaries. That's actually a kind of almost a shortcut, actually, that goes over all the material in each of the strands. And so in terms of essay planning, Georgina's right, you don't have to go through all the materials again, basically, but you need to think about the essay question and then go through, use the summaries at the end of each of the strands. It's incredibly important, to start to think, students do it in lots of different ways. It can be flow charts or, kind of diagrams or, mind maps or anything, but to start that process as the first kind of iteration, the first kind of way of thinking about the question and the types of materials you're going to use.
Do you think students can't plan essays, or do you think that they feel anxious about what a good plan might look like and think they might not be doing it right?
A plan's for the student. If it doesn't work for you individually, then don't do it. Yeah, it's not for your tutor in this case. Sometimes they are assessed, they're part of the process, but it's really got to work for you. And if it doesn't, then find something else. But I think it's really important, however you do it, to think about it, to try and plan it if you can, whether that's in your head, written down using stickies or whatever, and then do more than one draft. Yeah, you're not going to write it all out and then that's going to be it. You're going to write bits of it and then you're going to have to go back, look at it, make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And there are all kinds of different ways of doing that, but I think it's really important to make sure that each paragraph that you have really helps to answer the question. Even if it's a really beautifully written paragraph, if it doesn't answer the question, then you're wasting your words. And there's different tricks for doing that. I think DD 102 uses the P rule. That works for some students, but again, it doesn't work for all the students. So it's about kind of deciding what works for you, but really checking that once you've written a paragraph, leave it a bit because you're too close to it, but then after a while, go back to it and think, does that answer the question? And be really honest with yourself. And if it doesn't, delete it and start again.
And also with the plan as well, think about planning now and actually maybe go to a tutorial or a day school and actually, listen to what's being said, engage in the conversation, think, maybe I need to just change it a bit, bearing in mind, just ultimately because of what I've heard today, basically, and just restructure it. And it'll be gradually changing as you progress over the next month. But that's a good thing, basically. You'll be, just adjusting it to get the writing right.
Now, this brings us to our next, because I wanted to cover the online tutorials and the various tutorials. Now, I've had so many, and I've been in this boat as well, students say, I come to the tutorial and I'm so glad I did because I was completely off track and I was going off to do something I would much rather write about at the end of the day. So what happens in these tutorials and how useful are they as a way to, you said earlier, Matt, that the tutor would often outline what was required. But another thing that often happens is that students might do activities or exercises or have discussions, and that allows them to sort of thrash out their thinking and maybe make links they hadn't made before. So what happens at these tutorials and how do students find them, and what if they're European students?
Lots of questions there. I'm going to start with European students. There'll be online tutorials for European students. Unfortunately, there's no face-to-face at the moment, but there are, online day schools, and they're specifically designed. They're supported by our tutors in the northeast of England, who've got a specialism to support European students. The format will vary because tutors have a certain amount of leeway in what they do, but there'll be a focus on, planning the EMA, on understanding the question, and on structuring and writing the question as well, and looking at the types of materials that would support an answer.
And I think a lot of it as well is kind of learning by doing. We can tell students till the cows come home, but actually until you start doing it, it's difficult to know how much you've understood and how much you're learning. So, for example, a typical activity would be to kind of divide students into groups and say, OK, you look at this part of the module, you look at that part of the module, select some examples, some pieces of evidence that you think will help you answer this question, and then discuss it. So you'll go and you'll get lots of ideas from other students as well, and you'll think, well, that piece of evidence is okay, but this one is much, much better in terms of answering the question. So that kind of learning by doing, I think, is absolutely crucial at these tutorials as well.
And if you've been able to log on to this, then you can use OU Live, which is the current online tutorial system. It's really, really good. You can even log in from your mobile or your tablet, and you can ask questions in the chat, and there are lots of emojis, and you can see like a little screen with the slides that the tutor will have. So you don't need any specialist equipment. They're really, really easy and fun to use. And also, no one can hear what's going on at home unless you put your microphone on. So you can sit there with the dog barking, the children screaming, because I know that sometimes for students it's really difficult to get away, but they're a really nice window into being able to attend, even if it's just for a really short time. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, I did a day school in Belfast quite recently for DD 102 students, and it was just like that, basically. You know, we went through, you know, getting students to understand process and content words and dividing them into groups, and then dividing them into 3 groups, and they looked at each of the strands on DD 102 and looked at the materials and examples that would support an answer to the question, looking at making and remaking, basically. And so they each came back with, well, in this strand, you know, these examples would support, and then explain how they would support the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we have a look at some of those process and content words? Yeah. Also, let us know in the chat if you have an exam coming up, because we're going to do a little bit on exams as well. And if you don't have one, then at some point you probably will have an exam. So we'd like to offer you a little bit of advice then, but that's also quite relevant to EMAs. So let us know what you're doing. But we've got some of the words, the questions as well. So DD 102, that's the question. Hope you're going to tell us the answer, because all of your students have very loyally tuned in. So DD 102, they have 2 things to do. They have to write an essay, which is 90%. And it says, drawing on material from 2 out of the 3 strands of DD 102, discuss some of the ways in which lives are made and remade in unequal ways. Well, there's a lot going on in there.
There's a lot going on there, yeah. Well, and
they have 15,000 words, which is quite
1,500, yeah.
I keep saying that. I keep saying that. Don't worry, sorry. Do my maths,
yeah.
They have 1,500
That's right,
words.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the process words would be kind of drawing on and discuss.
Yeah.
So basically, drawing on using,
yeah.
basically 2 out of the 3 strands, and then discuss is kind of, I suppose, looking at different perspectives and different arguments, really, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah.
It's outlining them, describing them, but then thinking a little bit critically about them.
Yeah.
Scott wants to know if he's allowed to get someone else to write his essays. I'm not sure if he's got you in mind.
You'll probably fail.
Yes,
no,
right,
do it yourself. You'll do much better.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what if, I mean, because we've got a variety of students here, what if they don't have such clear process words in an essay title? What if they've got a statement? How do they identify then? Because like you say, it's about what you're doing and then how you're doing it, isn't it?
There'll still be some kind of process word, even if it's not the ones that kind of always come nice and clearly in the lists that we give to students in terms of to look out for. So it might be why, it might be how, it might be in what ways. And although they're not as clear perhaps as explain, outline, discuss, they're still telling you what to do with the material. Yeah, so they're still giving you that guide as to what to do with the material that you're being asked to use in answering the question.
That's right. And this is where the student notes really come in, because where there isn't that clarity, it will often say. So, for example, on the DD 103 question is, for example, is a how question. Okay, how does
Oh, these look good, actually.
Yeah,
How do themes of inequality, rights and justice help us understand whether the state is the best protector of common resources? Ooh.
It is a big question. It's a good question, but, and the focus there is on kind of blocks 3 and 4. But then if you look at the student notes, it talks about analysis and assessing, how those themes help you to answer the question. So it's an analysis and assessment question. So this is why it's so important to read the student notes, not just focus on the question, because the two go together. Because a question can only ever do so much. It's a headline, basically, and it's supported by the student notes.
Now tell us, are there any clues in these learning outcomes about what you're being asked to do? I mean, often students will skip over them and think they look very nice, and I'm sure you're ticking them off for your OU thing, whatever you're doing with them. But sometimes they've got words and they're like showing how the students can analyse or describe, or sometimes there might be something that they're asked to do to develop cognitive skills, for example. So what would your advice be in terms of looking at the learning outcomes as well as all the nice, helpful guidance about where to go and what to do?
Again, I think if they're helpful to students, then use them, and we try and present them in a way. For example, I think on DD 102 in the student notes, we say your tutor will be looking for this, you know, and look at that, because that's a kind of like an easy guide to the learning outcomes. Sometimes the learning outcomes themselves are a bit off-putting for students and they're not always sure exactly what they mean. So look for the shorthand again in terms of what is it your tutor will be looking for you to do, and use those, I think.
Now, I've got a question because, in particular, students on DD 102, this whole idea of things being holistic, they've been talking a lot about making and remaking and inequalities and various things like this. And if the EMA is not being marked by the tutor, do they still need to describe and define a lot of these words if it's building on something that they've already been doing?
Well, in Pracy, yes, because to an extent, it's almost more important actually with somebody who's not seen your work before, because you know, your existing tutor might have an implicit knowledge that you do know this because they've had a conversation with you or they've seen it in a previous essay. This marker, the EMA marker, won't have that. And so, yes, a definition of making and remaking, as the kind of module discusses, it will be really useful in the, you know, in the introduction or slightly later in the main body, first paragraph of the main body. And I think that's really important, actually, just so the marker can see you know what you're talking about,
Lovely. Well, while we're being very sensible, I hear there's silliness and naughtiness going on in the chat, and I think we've been giving you a lot of useful advice. So, HJ and Sophie, what's going on?
Well, Scott seems convinced that he can get someone else to do his TMA for him. I mean, his EMA, sorry. Excuse me. But I think actually he doesn't give himself enough credit. I think, Scott, you've got this. You can do this. You don't need anyone else. So everyone else there's a lot of exams going on, a lot of dissertations. And there's a lot of people struggling. So get through the next few months and you can have a nice summer off. You've all got this. You can all do this. We're here with you.
I would say I'd hazard to guess that if Scott can make a convincing argument for getting somebody else to do his work, he could probably make a convincing argument for finding two strands that illustrate making and remaking.
No excuses.
Well, I hear HJ's offering to do it for Kate.
Oh, right,
Which is plagiarism and very naughty, and we've got methods for finding out if that sort of thing goes on, haven't we? And severe penalties. It's not worth it, Scott. I wouldn't recommend it.
And students, I mean, one of the joys now of actually, we do have these kind of penalties in place, but we hardly ever have to use them now because students actually are an incredibly honest body. We're finding hardly anybody is trying to do anything like that.
And it goes back to the earlier point, you know, show them what you can do. You know, this is your chance to say, I can do this. Look how far I've travelled over these few months.
So, it's really important. We've just had a big discussion in our faculty about employability and personal development. You know, and actually students should take a lot of credit because they're able to write really coherent professional documents by the, essays at the end of their, 60 points on DD 102. And I think that's quite a significant skills progression,
And we shouldn't underestimate how hard part-time study is. So by virtue of the fact that you've got here, you've done most of your TMAs with everything that else goes on in your life, it really is a huge achievement. So you should be sitting there thinking, not anxious, I'm really proud of myself because I've got this far.
No,
because not everybody
absolutely.
does.
No, they don't.
So if you
They
have,
don't.
well done. It really is super.
Lovely. Right, I want to talk about exams because people have a lot of them. But before I do that, there's some really helpful things that not everyone knows about that they can access on Student Home. One of my favourites is the assessment calculator, where you can go in and predict what you might get and then try and figure out how the grades work. And the other is the tutorial finder as well. So if people are wanting to go to one of these day schools or online tutorials, they can find out. Can you tell us briefly how useful those are and how students can use them?
Yeah, I mean, just generally, the help centre is very good as well. I mean, there's a range of online, there's the assessment calculator, use it with caution, as it were, because you don't want to read too much in it, but it gives you a sense of what you need to do and what you need to get, which is reassuring for many students actually. And then the LEM system is very useful, obviously, for for finding tutorials. Just to reiterate how important they are at this stage for students, but just the Help Centre more generally, a lot of the materials and discussion we've been having today is supported by activities online, both in module-specific activities. So look at the kind of the index of online activities we've got on DD 102, but also go to the Help Centre. Yeah.
I think the other point as well, because I think I'm right in saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, that the assessment calculator doesn't work for DD 102. And I think that's to do with how the mark is worked out. So if you're in doubt about it, ring the student support team, because they'll help to work out if you're on track or not. Because often we find that students think, oh, it's no point me doing it because I've missed this TMA and I didn't do that and I didn't do very well in this. But actually, if they do the ICMA, which is quite an easy 10 marks, I did say that publicly, and the EMA, they may well pass. So if you're in doubt, speak to someone, an advisor in the student support team, and they'll say, yeah, it is worth you doing it because actually you probably can pass.
Now, briefly, tell us, because a lot of students might be having ICMAs right this week, actually. How do they work? I mean, for students who've never done one, what happens?
Well, they're different depending upon the module. So on DD 102, they're numerical. And this, you're right, students are doing them right now. I mean, the cut-off is the 4th of May for anybody. But the cut-off for DD 103 has just gone, actually. So, unfortunately, it's too late for people who haven't done it on that. But, so on DD 102, it's numerical, testing numerical skills. But we've given them a long tail of activities before that, which enabled them to build up to that. On DD 103, it's a mix of numeracy and testing knowledge.
So it's marked by a computer, not a tutor.
That's right.
And can they have their books open?
They can.
You can sit there with all the information you need in front of you.
Yeah.
And
Calculator.
It's a 2-week window. So there's plenty of time. And Georgina's right. It is relatively. With the ICMA, I think we're looking to try to give you marks to an extent, basically. Obviously, it's testing knowledge, but it's a different... I mean, one of the interesting things about this discussion is there are different forms of assessment, basically. In the university, what we're trying to do by having ICMAs, by having EMAs, essays and exams, they're all different forms of assessment. And so that's another kind of quality assurance and fairness thing, because students are often better at different types of, some people prefer essays, some people prefer exams, and we're giving you the opportunity to be assessed in different ways, which is a kind of issue of fairness, but also of rigorousness, of rigour. So,
Yeah, okay. But don't fear the ICMAs because, they are, like you say, an easier way of doing things, and you can have your books, you're not timed. But do read up on them before you do them, because some of them you can submit multiple times, some of them you can't, etc. So just make sure that you're comfortable with it before you do it. And of course you do it in the parameters, because unlike extensions, you can't. Actually, that was another thing I wanted to ask you. For the final assessment, what are the rules then on extensions before an exam or an assessment? Is that something students would be a bit more mindful of?
Yes, I mean, the final extension date, the very last date you can submit a TMA, hopefully students will have submitted TMA 05 long before then, but it is the 1st of June, because that's the conflation period. That's when the exam board is. It's slightly bizarre, because you can actually submit your final TMA after the EMA. It's not good practice, I would say, because but
all
is not lost then if you can't.
Because there may be students who are really behind and thinking, I've got to do both these things. Actually, in extremis, you could ask your tutor for an extension until then.
Okay.
But good practice is obviously to get TMA 05 in,
it would help
get feedback, and then do your EMA.
And Georgina, could you... Oh, yeah?
I was going to say your tutor can't give you an extension on the EMA, just so we're clear on that. But there is the possibility of resubmission. Okay. So my advice would be, and do correct me again if I'm wrong, get something in, even if you kind of write your name and an introduction or the self-reflection part, because once you've done that, you're in the system and that gives you the chance to resubmit. So please do get something in.
No, very much so.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay. Make sure the rules hadn't changed having stopped being chair and you've changed all the rules.
No, absolutely right. We want students to succeed, and we're conscious sometimes students are overburdened. Part-time study is hard. They're doing other things alongside it. Basically, it's completely right advice.
Now you say, what if, I know you started the session by saying if you fail you can resubmit, but what actually happens with that, and is it a really, really bad thing? Do many students fail?
No. Well, yeah, a few. Yeah.
If it happens, don't worry, you won't be the only one. So don't kind of see it as a judgment on yourself or anything like that. What's really helpful, I think, about most of the EMAs, particularly at level 1, is that you resubmit the same question.
Right.
Yeah, so you're answering the same question as first time round. And what's important is that you'll get feedback on your original submission. So the whole point is that you use that feedback to resubmit an improved version. Yeah, so you're learning from that process, and you will have help in doing that. So don't see it as like, oh, this is it, that's the end of my world.
What about your
it's
tutor?
not.
Is your tutor still there for you?
Yes, or is
They
it
are,
a different
although
tutor?
what we try to do now is we have a bank of tutors and an online room, basically, which is there as a support, and you're given the name of the tutor, basically, and access to the room.
Okay.
So you do have support during that period, the resubmission window, yeah.
Oh, that's great news. That's really good.
All isn't lost.
Yeah.
Good, all isn't lost. And we're planning a Student Hub Live for round results time in July as well, so we can fill you in then. Now, some students have exams, and we've only got about 10 minutes left, so I really just wanted to cover some key things about exams, because they're very similar in terms of often being holistic, and you'll have questions and a time limit to answer them, etc. So people will be planning and doing things, but they are different in that you have to go into an examination room and write with a pen, which is a challenging thing in itself. So, Matt, you've got some really good advice here, which you've given to us, and which is available as well for students from the help desk, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
When you see an exam paper, I mean, what can you do in 3 hours, and what should students sort of expect? Because EMAs can often be very holistic. You can make links, you can do lovely references, you can think and mull things over. Exams can be a little bit more stressful. So what's the key distinction then between these two?
Well, it's testing a different form of knowledge, I would say. I mean, often it depends on the module, basically, as to what each question, so for example, some exams will be, small individual answers. Some will ask for a much longer piece of work, so it's difficult to answer that question to an extent. But I mean, I think the key thing, and it's not a distinction, it's a similarity, is preparation. Preparation is more important, or as important, I think, for exams, because good preparation will actually get you to the exam hall on that day, having a clear sense of what the likely questions are going to be. You don't get the questions normally, but you'll have a clear sense of what areas are likely to be covered. You will have been given previous exam papers, and so you know the format of the question. You will have a good understanding of how many questions there are going to be and what each of those questions is going to be worth. And actually that will help you, actually before you get in the exam hall and look at the actual questions they're going to be doing, thinking, well, how can I kind of plan for this 3 hours? How much time am I going to be spending on each question? And actually also going back to the idea about essay planning, well, there's exam planning. How am I going to, do a mind map or do a quick plan so I can, just spend 5 minutes at the start of the exam planning on what I'm going to do for each question? And have I, got a plan that allows me to spend 10 minutes at the end of the exam just going over everything, making sure I've covered all the bases, that I've actually put my name at the top of the paper, things like that, small things that people don't think about. So it's about being prepared and about using this month and a half now. Exams are in late May, early June for most people. Really thinking about the actual format of the exam, basically, So
would you say these past, because you can download the past exam papers, how useful are they, and what should you do with them? Should you read them and try and spot the questions? Should you actually physically try and do, what should you do with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're useful practice. They give you an indication of the types of questions that are asked, not the exact one, but the types of questions, so you know what to look for. It means that the kind of, when you get into the exam room, you're not going to open the paper and think, oh my goodness me, it looks nothing like I've seen before. So it kind of gets rid of some of that anxiety of when you go in there and sort of turn the paper over. And I would say have a practice at some of them. Some of them, there'll be different types of questions depending on the module that you're doing. As Matt said, some will be short answers, some might be sort of longer longer essay-style answers, have a go at home. You know, set yourself the time limit, whether it's 30 minutes for one question or whatever, and see what you can do in that time, because it is different to writing an essay in that sense. You're not going to be able to have the same level of depth, the same level of detail that you have when you're writing an essay. So be realistic about what you can achieve in that time. But that being said, a lot of the advice we've talked about already still applies. So read the question extremely carefully. Look at how many marks are allocated to each question. There's no point spending half of the exam time on a question that's only worth 5 marks. You know, so divide your time well and equally between the questions, depending on how many marks they attract. You know, timekeeping in an exam is absolutely crucial, because you can fail because you've written a superb answer on one question and ignored all the others.
Right.
You know, you really need to read the instructions and questions extremely carefully.
And think about the weightings. And the other thing, I know it's a simplistic kind of point, but it's most people type their essays. Actually, and so for a lot of students, writing is something, you know, writing at length, actually, so practicing and just thinking about how much you can write in a given period. So say you've got 3 questions, 3 hours, it's an hour per question. How much can you write in an hour? And so when you get into the exam hall and you turn the page, you've done your plan, you've got 50 minutes, say, for one of the 3 questions, you know, you're not going to be terrified that you've not written enough, because you've got a sense, because you've done it before, of how much you can actually write. And so you're thinking, well, I'm doing okay actually, because I can write about 1,000 words in, you know, in 50 minutes or whatever, basically, and I've done that. That's great. Move on to the next question.
And if you run out of time, rather than sit there panicking, use bullet points. Because at least through doing that, even though you're not kind of writing in prose in a way that you would in an essay, through a bullet point, you can still show whoever's marking it your knowledge and understanding, that you've grasped these concepts, that you know what they mean, or whatever it is that the exam's testing. You know, so don't be afraid to do that if you're really running out of time and you just can't write anymore.
Would you say you should plan questions as well in an exam, because you get this nice booklet? Can you write a draft plan on them?
Yes, you can. I mean, I think you can annotate the actual question paper. So if you want to,
Yeah, but it's not like an essay, so you're not going to have your kind of side of A4. I would always say, kind of, you know, go in and decide which questions you're going to answer, read them very carefully, and then sort of think, okay, 4 or 5 bullet points on that question. You know, my 4 or 5 main points that I'm going to get. So do that kind of plan rather than, you know, perhaps what we'd expect from an essay plan. Because again, you know, if you run out of time, at least the marker will look at your plan, your 4 or 5 short bullet points, and think, well, actually, they knew what they were going to do, so I'll give them some marks for that.
That's right. And refer back to the plan and the question, because often you're doing it at such speed that you lose the thread sometimes, and you just write down stuff. You know, constantly refer back. Actually, this paragraph is helping me answer, and linking to the next paragraph, which is, you know. Obviously, we always say to students, always make sure on your EMA or TMA you've got the question on each, each page, basically, because again, that's something that students sometimes do. They forget the thread they're supposed to be talking about, the question, but it's really important in an exam as well.
But I think also as well, you know, I know it's easy to say, you know, don't be terrified by them. But actually, some students do incredibly well in exams, and they surprise themselves by how well that they do. Because, you know, we get this kind of, exams, anxiety and all the rest of it. But actually, when you get in there, you've got this period of time, again, show the tutor what it is you can do. And I think a lot of students will actually be pleasantly surprised by that. You know, you get in there, your adrenaline goes, and suddenly you think, actually, I can do this. I do know the answers to these. You know,
I always used to do much better. I used to love exams because even though they were really stressful, I knew there was a limit to what I could cover, and I didn't have to remember everything. And I always did a lot better. And I didn't have to, because I was one of those students who refused to get rid of the nice sentences that didn't really mean anything. I just thought they were so lovely. Despite stagnating the whole thing, I refused to let them go. Whereas an exam, you can't really do that. You've got to be quite quick. So it can be quite a good way of assessing things. And when you mark them, of course, you know, there's a limit to what you can include. So you don't have to have all the right references and everything.
Very much. I mean, you know, I was exactly the same way. I was much better at exams. But again, this is why the university, as lots of other universities do, they assess students in different ways, because students will have strengths and weaknesses in different areas.
So I think many students will be pleasantly surprised that actually they can do this. And even if they don't enjoy the experience, it doesn't last forever. It's
Very
1.5
few
hours,
people die.
2 hours. Yeah. You come out the end of it and you think, right, I've done that. I'm going to go and treat myself and have a coffee and a bun
Yeah.
or whatever it is. Yeah. So and just by doing it, even if you didn't enjoy it, even if you don't do particularly well, you've shown that you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
you can. You'll get something out of it.
I mean, it's just probably a useful point to make now that for students who do struggle with kind of motor skills, there is a lot of support out there. They can get an amanuensis, special arrangements in the exam hall.
Yeah.
And so now's the point to think, well, am I able to do what I need to do? Do I need a little bit of extra support or special requirements, special arrangements? And so contact the SST if they don't have that kind of set in train, or at least ask the question of the student support service. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if all of a sudden on the day of the exam something horrific happens and you can't concentrate? You get to the exam, but you just think it's all gone pear-shaped, I couldn't think straight, or you're sick. What happens then?
Well, you would normally put in a special circumstance form, and subject to the particular circumstances, it's difficult to second guess these things. But the exam board would normally be sympathetic, and you can get a research opportunity. Okay. Yeah, normally in the same way you would for an EMA. Yeah.
And students could find out about that by emailing their tutor. But if something really messes up the performance, other than just I didn't like it.
That's right. No, exactly. Yeah. The university is committed to giving people a second chance where circumstances, are to an extent beyond their control or something's gone badly wrong. Yeah, no, very much so. So there's always there's normally another opportunity. Yeah.
Brilliant. Matt and Georgina, thank you so much for coming along today. I hope that we've answered everyone's questions. It's likely that we haven't, but that's been a really comprehensive account. And I think the really important things that you've really shown people is that this is a really great chance to actually try and look at integrating some of that material together, show people what you know, and that it is really fair. And I guess that people are in the same boat feeling anxious, whether it's an EMA or an exam. But, this is a part of the whole process, and it's one that it's okay to feel anxious about, but we will get through it.
And they've achieved so much already.
Yeah.
That's the key message.
And hopefully the conversation is a prompt to students to now go to the Student Help Centre, go to the DD102 or their module website and look at the activities, and if they can, get your tutorial over the next month.
So go to Matt's tutorial in London if you can. You want to find out more with all of your questions, etc. But there is a lot going on. Matt and Georgina, thank you so much for coming on. I hope your tutorial goes well.
I've plugged it enough.
No, it's been wonderful. No, thank you both very much for coming along, and I'm sure you've reassured students massively about all of that. Right, well, in our next session, 11 o'clock, a bit hungry, so we're going to be doing some essay writing with some food. And I've asked Nikki Harlow to come along, and she is from the creative writing department at the Open University, which is great because I thought, well, essay writing, we need somebody very creative. But the thing with essays is that we also need quite a lot of structure there. And we've heard from people before how there are various issues with planning essays. So we hope that we can tackle some of this in a fun way. But let's take a quick trip to the hot desk and see if there are any questions about exams or EMAs that we haven't answered, and I'll do my utmost best to answer those, and how everyone's feeling right now about your various challenges that are coming up. Sophie and HJ.
Yes.
It's been really busy.
We've had lots of great stuff. And William says, I just want to say that I'm glad I came here today. Got some great pointers to help me with the DD 102 EMA, and it's first time as well. And lots of people agreed in that. They found that very helpful. And yes, so we got lots of different comments, and I'm sure Nikki can help us with them as well. I've just picked out some of my favourite things because, as everyone knows, I like my exam tips. Davin had a great one, is review your TMA comments. So I really like that because sometimes even I forget to do that. It's hard to remember just to go back and actually pick up on the things that your tutors said throughout and put that into a really great TMA. Getting someone to read over your assignment, another great one. Sometimes when you're just writing through, and sometimes you can jumble up words and things like that and not realise you're even doing it because it's your own work. So yes, I have found that helpful in the past, and I really like that. And I like Matt's comment on practicing exam papers as well. And there's practice exams available as well on some of the OU websites. We'll find a link for it, which are really helpful. And as Matt said, just getting used to practicing and writing can be really useful, and that's another way to do that.
Yeah, we had some really nice tips actually. So Nikki suggests that you can ask for some spare paper in the exam. So that's really helpful. Spare paper, different pens that you can use, little things that actually make quite a big difference. There's also, Sean has stated that you might start with a plan, but that actually isn't what you end up with, and it's just having a plan that gets you started. We've had some questions on tutorials and how they're a great way to meet students. I always used to go to at least the very last one before the exam, if nothing else, because they're really helpful. Also, you meet people who are in the same boat as you, so don't feel quite as on your own. So we've had some really nice comments in there. If there is anything at all that we've missed, drop us an email, studenthub@open.ac.uk, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.
Lovely. Thank you very much, both. It sounds like you've been having a lot of fun on the chat and lots of great ideas and advice there as well. So, HJ, what are you doing in terms of preparing for your assessment?
Panicking mostly. I think, like we discussed before, having a plan before. I'm still in the early phases, but sort of just looking at the question, and I've been writing down in my notebook that I have here. So I've been practicing writing my outline, trying to think of sort of some of the main points. So I'm doing a compare and contrast between different things, and I've just written a small outline of sort of the main things I need to get across and what the assignment instructions have given me. And I think, like we were told, going over the notes is really important, but that's where I am, the outline. I haven't got much further than that, so maybe I'm expecting this session to be very helpful in progressing.
Where everyone else is at. If anyone else can beat HJ, if anyone's past that point, let us know. We'll find where everyone is.
I'm sure they are. It's not hard.
No. Or if you want to see HJ's video on procrastination that he once made, we can try and dig that out at some point as well. But, planning is a difficult part of the process. And we're now going to take a look at essay writing, which is the end bit of all of that planning. So I'm hoping that you guys are all sort of mulling over what you've got, that you've certainly had a chance to look at the questions, find out where that guidance is on your module website, read through the notes, print them out, write them down, and start to think about how you might start tackling your end of module assessment. And as Sophie says, let us know where you're at. You might like to let us know the question you've got, because as we saw earlier, there were some really, really interesting ones there also. So that would be great.